wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Sooner Nation podcast. I know it's a bye week for Oklahoma. We've still got a lot to talk about, though. How about the path to the playoff for the Sooners with the first set of college football playoff rankings coming out? Finally going to get to a point where we can talk a little bit Oklahoma City Thunder. Ironically, they lost their first game of the season on Wednesday night, the day before we're recording this podcast. And how about Red November? How important is it for Oklahoma to finish strong? What does their history tell us about it? That's what we're going to unpack here today on the Sooner Nation podcast. Thanks so much for hanging out with us and, again, being along on the ride. Let's talk about first the path to the playoff and where Oklahoma fits in right now, because we had actually a segment about this on the Tuesday edition of the Sooner Nation podcast, where the first college football playoff rankings of the season were out. The Sooners sit at number 12. Not a bad spot considering the bumps that they've had along the way, but it's also a clear signal that Oklahoma, while still in the conversation, they've got little to no margin for error. So every snap, every drive, every Saturday from here on out will either strengthen their resume or close the door entirely for them. And that includes this Saturday with them being on a bye week. If we're going to be honest about this, that's exactly where I think, we all think this team should want to be. When you look at what they were in 2024, to be going into the second and even the third week of November, still in the conversation, that's a huge step. I think if we could go back to November of 2024 and just say, look, there may be some bumps in the road. It won't be a perfect season, but when you get to November, when you get deep into November, you'll still be in the conversation for the playoff. I think every single member of Sooner Nation would accept that. And what's ahead of this now is a defining stretch for Oklahoma's, second season here in the SEC. It's that gauntlet that's going to test their identity more than this their ability. Like they're the kind of month where November every year is the kind of month where good teams seem to fade away, but great teams make their statements. And let's start with the obvious here. That I said this Tuesday night. The playoff committee's message was pretty clear that they value quality wins, they value consistency, they value game control. So this is not just box score fireworks. They're looking for teams that not only win, but also dictate how the game is played. And that's where Oklahoma's recent win at Tennessee looms pretty large. Nope, not a perfect game in Knoxville, but it was gutsy. It was absolutely physical. It was the type of SEC win on the road that checks the boxes for the committee. And the Sooners leaned into their running game for the third week in a row, but they also ended up playing, smart situational football. They trusted their special teams to tilt the field. And that win, I really believe that Tennessee win, it doesn't just show up on paper. I think it helped change the perception of this team following the loss to Ole Miss. And so the committee notices when you go into a loud stadium on the road, particularly in the SEC at night, and you finish strong. But we know this, perception is only going to carry you so far. If Oklahoma wants to move from, being in the hunt to controlling their narrative, then they've got to do three things in November. They've got to win some games convincingly. They've got to keep improving defensively, and then they've got to build momentum week to week. And the reason I said some games, I don't think you have to win convincingly in Tuscaloosa. I think you just have to win. But you've got a Missouri squad limping into Norman. You've got a LSU squad that's been kind of chaotic with the firing of Brian Kelly. Those have to be convincing wins, in my opinion. And let's go down that road for just a little bit. Because when you look at the three games, right? You're at Alabama, you've got Missouri, you've got LSU. And I don't think you can overstate how big the Alabama game is. Because if Oklahoma beats Alabama in Tuscaloosa a week from this Saturday, it's not just going to move them up a few spots. It really could rewrite their playoff trajectory. The committee weighs quality wins, and they weigh them heavily. And a road victory over a top 5 team would arguably be the biggest win of the Brent Venables era. And we've already kind of tabbed that right now for the Tennessee game. Clearly beating Alabama in Tuscaloosa would supersede that. But it's not just about the big games. The Sooners, they can't afford to stumble against the teams that they should beat. And the committee is going to notice that. Style points may feel superficial, but this is the era of analytics. There's 12 playoff spots coming. Dominant wins, they matter. And when Oklahoma gets a chance to bury a team, they've got to bury them. Not just coast to the finish, they've got to bury them. And so I think you've got to look at that first angle here for down the stretch for Oklahoma. But the second thing is you've got to show defensive consistency. And I know this is where some people are going to maybe like start pushing back because the defense has been nothing short of spectacular this season. But I think Oklahoma has shown on the defensive side of the ball, since leaving the Big 12, that has been the biggest area of growth for this program. And Brent Venables, they have an identity on this defense now. Again, not perfect, right? Because the Tennessee game reminded us of that particularly early. But they adjusted. They tightened up on the edges. They forced key third down stops. They flipped the momentum completely in the second half. And that's what needs to be consistent. That's what needs to continue. Take your shots, take your lumps, but then bounce back. And if that continues, then Oklahoma is going to get themselves in a position where they have a real shot. Because playoff football, it's not about who scores 45 points every week. It's about who can control the tempo, who can limit mistakes, and who can win the field position battle. And that's where, again, that Tennessee game gave Oklahoma a prototype for how they need to win through the month of November. Control the ball, trust your defense, let your athletes make plays in space when it matters the most. And let's talk about momentum. Momentum is not just an emotional buzzword, it's a tangible factor in how the committee evaluates late season teams. I mean, every year, right? Every year we see a program surge from outside the top 10 into serious contention because they got hot at just the right time. Think about 2017, right? Ohio State. They didn't make it. Obviously, there wasn't a playoff at that moment, but Oklahoma State in 2021. They were soaring into that Big 12 championship game, and they would have been in the playoff had they beaten Baylor. But those final impressions, that's what I'm talking about. Those final impressions is what matters. And for Oklahoma, their opportunity to kind of build a crescendo here to end the season, that's what's lying in front of them. If they can handle business over the next 3 games, they roll into that Alabama game with confidence, the playoff conversation changes. Suddenly it's not anymore about can Oklahoma sneak in. The conversation turns to who wants to play Oklahoma right now. They become that dangerous team. And let's not forget, this is a program with playoff DNA. Even though this roster is young in places, they've got a mentality about them. You've got guys like John Mateer. You've got the rise of the running backs. You know, they're showing that they can lead drives under pressure. The offensive line is starting to gel. The special teams, especially with Tate Sandell, right? His performance he had last week, they're becoming a weapon. And that's how championship teams are built. Not around one superstar, but around balance, maturity, and poise when it counts. And there's always going to be that portion of the fan base wondering, it's too little too late. We should have beat Texas. You should have lost at home to Ole Miss. But the truth is, it's not. It's absolutely not. Not yet. And I would even go as far as to say, if you lose to Alabama, you're still not out. Now, you lose to one of the Tigers, absolutely, I think you are. But you're competitive against Alabama? I think 9-3 keeps Oklahoma in the conversation. The Sooners have the resume potential to make noise if the dominoes fall. Now, sure, they'll absolutely need help if they drop one of these final 3 games. And honestly, some chaos up at the top would be ideal. But if they win out, they finish with a strong road win over Alabama. They look convincing at home against the Tigers, both of them. That's the path. That's the path that puts them in. And when you have multiple one-loss teams ahead of them, they're still set to face off and head-to-head showdowns. The recipe is there. And remember, like we just talked about, the committee loves momentum. They love those headline wins. They love the toughness. And all of those things, Oklahoma is sitting right in front of them. They're all things that the Sooners can put on display in the month of November. The question isn't whether the path exists. The question is whether Oklahoma is ready to walk it. So what does that look like? What does walking that path look like? It looks like taking care of business against every team left on the schedule. It looks like closing halves better and starting faster than what they did in Knoxville. It looks like staying healthy, minimizing turnovers, limiting or just eliminating penalties. That'd be awesome. And letting the defensive front dictate the pace instead of reacting to it. Because in this landscape of the SEC, nobody's handing out playoff berths for potential. You've got to earn it with discipline and physicality week in and week out. And there's no one in this conference, save maybe Texas A&M, who's going to go unscathed through the regular season. So if Oklahoma plays clean, if they tackle well, if John Mateer continues to grow in his confidence and he continues to get healthy, if the running game keeps chewing clock like they've done the last 3 games, there's no reason that the Sooners can't be in that top 8 conversation by the end of the month. In short, this next stretch, it's not about surviving. It's about defining who Oklahoma is right now. They're not the team from the old Big 12 that, flashes talents but fades late. Or are they? Maybe they have, that SEC mentality now that can line up against the heavyweights and win with grit, because that's what we saw in Knoxville. So that's the question that's November's going to answer for us. And obviously, we're not finished talking about November. We got more of that coming up on this episode. But that's what makes this month so exciting, because for the first time in years, the Sooners don't just have something to prove. They've got something to take, and it's right there in front of them. And the next 3 games, they're going to tell us whether the Sooners are ready or not. So that's the path to the playoff. It's a narrow path. It's a steep path, but it's still right there in front of Oklahoma. They just need to walk it. They need one disciplined Saturday at a time. So let's see what happens. Thanks for hanging with us here on the Sooner Nation podcast.
Hey there, it's Dr. Sanjay Gupta with some exciting news to share. CNN is now streaming. That means you can read, watch, and stream everything in one subscription. You can watch news live 24/7. You can also explore catch-up videos and explainer videos. And you can also watch a library of CNN's originals, including my latest documentary, It Doesn't Have to Hurt. Just go to cnn.com/all access.
Well, I told you that this segment was going to be coming at some point, and now it's here. We got to start talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder. And with the Sooners being off on Saturday, not a better time to slide a segment in here than right now. So if you're not here for Thunder content, I get it. Just fast forward for the next 12 to 15 minutes, and we're back to Sooner Talk after this segment. But unfortunately, when I get the opportunity to record about the Thunder, it's coming off of a 121-119 loss in Portland. And it really wasn't dramatic just because of the outcome. I think you look at what this loss revealed if you're a Thunder fan. This was their first loss of the season. Sure, but I think more importantly, it was a reminder that even championship teams can lose their edge if they let their discipline slip. And what I want to do, just take a few minutes and let's break down what went wrong, what still went right, and what this game means for the Thunder's trajectory throughout the rest of the season. So let's start with the narrative here. The Thunder, they open up in Portland. They come out roaring, race to a 41-21 first quarter lead, and everything just looked seamless. Ball movement was there. Transition baskets were there. Defensive intensity was there. They looked like the team that was built to dominate on the road in their conference. But then they begin to unravel. The Trailblazers rally from a 22-point hole to win 121-119. And the key stat here is after the first quarter, Oklahoma City was outscored 100-78. And you typically don't see that from a defending champion who still is a contender. So what changed? Because I think most of us will agree that this is the best team in the league. But here's a few things you can look at. First of all, you look at all 5 starters, right? All 5 Thunder starters, and yes, they were shorthanded. We'll get into that. All 5 Thunder starters had at least 3 fouls. So that opens the door for Portland. That opens it wide for Portland. The Blazers got to the line consistently, and they kept their momentum. And Oklahoma plays an aggressive form of defense, but it turned into undisciplined fouling. I think you also have to look at transition and rhythm. The Thunder's first quarter was full of fast break points. They forced turnovers, they made easy baskets, but after that, the transition game just dried up. In the second quarter, they added very few fast break points, and they were kind of punished for it. And I think something that leads to that is maybe a little bit of fatigue and depth, right? So here's what I said we'd come to. The Thunder were missing Chet Holmgren, Lou Dort, and Alex Caruso. They all set this game out. So the cupboard wasn't fully stocked, and Portland took advantage of that. I mean, this is a high-level, high athletic, deep league. And you would expect, though, the champion to overcome those absences, and they nearly did on the second night of a back-to-back. Don't forget, they played the Clippers on Tuesday night. And I think that played into them coming up short. Because you look at the late execution, you look at the missed sequences here, in the final seconds, down 3, Isaiah Joe was fouled with, like half a second left? After the replay review, it was determined that his toe was on the three-point line, so he got 2 free throws instead of the 3 that should have been there. So he makes 1, he intentionally misses the second, and the Thunder went for the tip-in, and they came out empty. So that single moment, it kind of crystallized a night of small mistakes. And, Dagnall said it plainly. We had some controllable stuff, fouls, turnovers, second chance points that really hurt us. And that sums it up. So this team is a team that prioritizes standards. And against Portland, they slipped a little bit. But, look, this is not a gloom and doom situation. Goodness gracious. They won, first 7 in a row? And so let's not turn this everything into pessimistic. Let's be clear. This is absolutely not a sign of regression. There's still a lot to talk about. The Thunder, still the front runners of the league. I am curious about what Chicago's doing, though. I got to throw that out there. I am curious about Chicago. But you got SGA, you got the reigning MVP, and should be, I know we're just like weeks into the season, but should be the leading candidate at this point for MVP. He drops 35. That continuity of elite production, it just remains there. This is a team that continues to have a star who shows up game after game. And let me just remind you that this was the second night, again, of a back-to-back where a lot of teams, Clippers, they have to rest their stars in back-to-back games. SGA has not done that. And then you look at the players around him. Look at Aaron Wiggins, 27 points, 7 of 10 from three-point range. And so when injuries hit, here's another guy who just steps up. So it shows you the kind of depth that this team has, and it is championship quality depth. And you got to, I mean, how can you not? How can you not love Ajayi Mitchell, right? And he's thrust into a bigger role in Portland, makes a mistake down the stretch, but this kid, the ceiling is so high. And the good news is he took ownership. Here's his quote: obviously a lot to learn from today. Me as a guard, I've got to take care of the ball. So he's not shying away from the moment, nor is he shying away from the accountability that comes with that moment. And that's exactly what you want to hear from the emerging pieces around your superstar, taking that ownership. So this game, I think it breeds growth within this team. You know, they have an elite core. You'll be hard-pressed to name a handful of teams who have a core as young, as elite, and as locked up as what the Thunder do. They have elite depth. They have a coherent system. And so when you look at a loss like this early in the season, it can be more beneficial than it would, sneaking into a late win. So what are the lessons, right? What does Oklahoma City need to fix after their one loss that not everybody, but some people seem to be upset about? Let's shift. Let's talk about those adjustments. Because I do think if Oklahoma City just shrugs off this loss and they move forward stronger, then they haven't. Well, I think if they shrug off the loss, there's really nothing to learn. But if they decide that we'll be stronger from this, here's a few areas I think that they got to react to. I think they've got to find balance between aggression and discipline on defense. Their identity has become this high-octane defense where pressure, switching, disrupting. But that becomes chaotic, and when it does, it gets punished. So I think they have to maybe recalibrate a little bit here, playing so many role players and starting spots. Like they need to keep the fire, but control the flame, if I could say that. So what Mark Daigneault has to do, he's got to manage depth and rotation during these back-to-back stretches. And you're missing three important contributors, right? The wear and tear of a back-to-back showed up in this game. The Thunders, they've got to be able to manage minutes. They've got to be able to manage that load time. And they've got to find strategic rest. And that's where veteran teams win. But I think also you look at consistency outside, right? When you've got the pace and the transition that the Thunder play with, when it's humming, they are unstoppable. But when the half-court game slows, right, turnovers begin to creep in, that's when the cracks in the foundation appear. I think the guys on Thunder SI said it this way: in those games, it's about detail being better in every detail, right? So clutch details and late game execution. You got the three free throw sequence with Isaiah Joe's toe being on the line. You've got the missed tip in. You've got tiny margins that determine the outcome. And championship teams make those plays. So I'm not saying they're not a championship team. I'm saying that they have a mirror to look in to figure out what they have to do next. And I think ultimately, when you look at the bigger picture, this loss is not a setback. It's more of a signal. And you know what we like to do on the Sooner Nation podcast? I guess we'll call this segment the Thunder Nation, right? But we like to zoom out, right? We just like to zoom out and look at the big picture. And for the Thunder, this loss is less an interruption and more a signal. A sign that, if you will, the margin for error is shrinking. But they still have elite aspirations, and those come with discipline. So you start the season at 8-0, you look great. Staying unbeaten, look like, wow, the Wonder Kids, right? But what happens when the opponent fights back? What happens when the league adapts? What happens when the real test comes? And we know this team is championship caliber. But we also know that champions are built, they're not declared. And the Thunder, They have that pedigree. They're the reigning champs, but they're also still very young. And many times young teams need reminders. And I think this one arrived in a hard way. But that's fine because no one's going undefeated in the NBA regular season. And I think you look at, standing still, really, in this league, it's falling behind. And the league, they see Oklahoma City's core, they see their depth, and they're going to make adjustments. But losses like this can teach adaptation. And you've got a culture that you have developed in Oklahoma City. You've also got an expectation that comes with playing for the Thunder, and the culture must match the expectation. I believe it does. I believe that the Thunder market themselves as a disciplined, determined, detail-oriented team. And when that standard slips, even momentarily like it did in Portland, it becomes visible. And so your identity holds even when the schedule gets tricky. And what that means is that this just becomes a fuel type moment. Like true champions, they use losses as fuel. And the Thunder have the makeup to do just that. They can show up, they can refocus, and they can respond. And I expect that to begin on Friday. So here's where we stand on all this. The Thunder lost Wednesday, right? A game that they should have won. A game that they might have won if they checked, every detail in focus. But they didn't do that. And that's okay, because what matters now isn't the record, it's the reaction. Will they fix foul trouble? Will they stabilize their grip on defense? Will they deepen their rotation and manage the load? Will they keep that standard that we've become used to, even when, the shine of the scoreboard is not what it says it should be? That's the question that we want to look at. This is not a derailment. This is a teaching moment for a young team. Sure, they're champions, but they are a young team. And if we know anything about Oklahoma City, we know that they learn fast. So that's it for our first ever segment on the Oklahoma City Thunder. We got more Sooner talk coming right up after this. If you have followed Oklahoma football long enough, you know that November used to mean one thing, that the Sooners were about to play their best football. It didn't matter what happened in September or October. By the time the air gets colder in Norman, Oklahoma was heating up. Championship runs were built in November. Conference titles were clinched in November. BCS berth, playoff berths all clinched in November. And the Sooners year after year made a habit of turning close races into coronations during the season's final stretch. But in recent years, that November dominance, that defining part of Oklahoma's identity, it's not been there. And that's the question we want to look at, we want to tackle here in this final segment of today's podcast. Can Oklahoma reclaim that November legacy? Red November, right? Because this 2025 season hits its final 3 weeks this month. And the Sooners are positioned right where they want to be. They're relevant, they're competitive, and they're still very much in the playoff conversation. But we've kind of seen this movie before, right? The question isn't whether they can finish strong. It's whether they can finish like the champions that they used to be, like the Oklahoma that we grew accustomed to. Let's add some perspective here, okay? For 2 decades under Bob Stoops, Oklahoma practically owned November. From 2000 to 2016, Bob Stoops' teams went 48-9 in the month of November. That's an 84% win rate. Those aren't just cupcake games. Those were rivalry matchups. You got the Bedlam battles. You got top 10 showdowns. You got those de facto conference and postseason playoff eliminators. And the reason was simple. Those teams knew how to peak. They got better as the season went on. They were tough. They were disciplined. And they didn't flinch when the lights got brighter. Even in the Lincoln Riley era, that carried over. Remember 2017, right? 2018, 2019? The Sooners didn't just win in November. They survived chaos. You got comebacks against Baylor. You got double-digit deficits that flipped into wins. You got the late-game magic from Baker, Kyler, Jalen. Those weren't perfect teams, but they were resilient ones. They knew how to finish. But since the move towards the SEC, the roster transition that followed, that old November magic has not really been what we thought it was. It's absolutely not been automatic. The Sooners have become inconsistent. 1 week, they look like world beaters. The next week, they look like they're just fighting to stay afloat. And we've seen the same issue. We saw it in 2022, 2023, 2024. We got flashes of brilliance, but no sustained poise. And now in 2025, we're seeing this test appear before us one more time. So here's where we are right now. Second year in a new conference, and a first-year quarterback in this conference. A defense that has matured to one of the best in the country. And now you've got a month that's going to define whether this season becomes a step forward or if we're talking about another what if the first weekend of December. The question for Brent Venables and this team is not just can they win games in November, it's can they carry themselves like the November teams we're used to seeing in Norman. Because this conference, man, when November comes, it's not a victory lap. It is survival of the most complete teams. Think about everything that goes down in November. The weather changes. It gets colder. The hits seem to get harder. The fatigue sinks in. And the margin for error, it shrinks. But those are all moments where culture grows. And for the first time since Venables took over, we're starting to see true signs that Oklahoma might find that November identity again. I want to go back to that win against Tennessee. That's all we got to talk about right now because there's no game on Saturday. But, I mean, Knoxville was not a flashy performance. It absolutely wasn't perfect, but it was physical. It was poised. And probably most importantly, it was resilient. Oklahoma did not panic when Tennessee punched first. They absorbed the blow. They adjusted defensively, and then they slowly took control of the line of scrimmage. That's what good November football looks like. You win ugly, but you can also win decisively. The defense, in particular, showed maturity. Early in the season, this is a defense that was prone to giving up some big plays and long drives. But against Tennessee, they held strong when it mattered the most. They stood up and forced field goals. They controlled the tempo. And that's where I think the shift begins. Not really in highlight plays, although there were plenty from the defense, but really in the mentality to how you respond when things get tough. You've got another piece of the puzzle with special teams evolving into their identity. And I don't think you can overstate how crucial special teams become late in the season. Field position, kicking, coverage. Think about the last two games, right? You got the victory of Tate Sandell against Tennessee, but also you got the agonizing defeat of Isaiah Satina fumbling on a punt against Ole Miss. But if they shored up the ball control, the ball protection, and Tate Sandell's consistency, it continues, that has the opportunity to be a massive difference maker for Oklahoma in the month of November. That's the kind of detailed-oriented football that the Sooners need if they're going to go win in Tuscaloosa or dominate both Tiger teams that come to Norman to close out the season. Because we know this, championships are won by the team that looks the best on paper. They're won by the team that makes the fewest mistakes in the fourth quarter in November. And then you got to look, cough, cough, back at all the penalties. So if we step back and we ask this question, why Oklahoma used to dominate this month? It comes down to two things. The answer is this. You look back at history, what you see from the Sooners is depth and discipline. Depth let them survive the grind. Discipline kept them from beating themselves. And this 2025 roster, it's got a little bit of both finally. Venables has built a real defensive monster, and it's got depth. You're seeing fresh legs rotate in late in games. You're seeing linemen and linebackers who can sustain gap control for 4 quarters. If you flip the side of the ball, you've got depth at the running back. You've got 2 running backs who have grinded out, 100-yard performances over the last 3 weeks. And then that duo gives Oklahoma the ability to wear teams down physically. And that is huge. That is huge because November football in this month, it's trench warfare. You win and you lose these games in the trenches. It's not about schemes. It's not necessarily about tempo. Tennessee proved that. It's about leverage. It's about toughness. It's about conditioning. And the old Oklahoma teams that thrived late in the year, they thrived because of that. And I think for the first time, really since Brent Venables arrived, you're seeing this team have the ability to do that once more. But still, the truest test is not Tennessee. It's what's coming up next. The road trip to Alabama. That is I don't know that you could say a rivalry matchup, but it kind of feels like it because of what happened last time. It could, well, it does. It has the ability, one way or the other, to kind of shape the postseason picture for the Sooners. And if Oklahoma is going to sustain its November strength, this is the game where we see if that culture is real or if it's just some talk. Can they handle adversity in Tuscaloosa? Can they control the ball and trust the defense when the crowd gets loud and the game tightens up? That's what defines a mature team. That's what separates hopeful from dangerous. Because for all the storylines about playoff positioning, this next stretch, it's not about rankings. It is about reputation. This is where Oklahoma can prove that their move into this conference didn't just change their zip code, easy for me to say. It didn't just change their zip code, but it sharpened their identity. And that brings us back to this idea of legacy. When we talk about November legacy, we're really talking about whether Oklahoma still has the DNA of a championship program. You can rebuild rosters, you can change schemes, you can move conferences, but championship DNA is about something deeper. It's about the ability to respond when the margin gets thin, to play complementary football, to win the moments that don't show up on the stat sheets. And that's where this team is starting to show their real growth. You see it in the way they huddle after mistakes and they talk to one another. You see it in the communication between the defense and the special teams. You see it in how Venables and his staff adjust at halftime instead of waiting for the next week to figure something out. That's not the flash and burn Oklahoma that we've seen a couple of years, in a row now. This is the slow burn Oklahoma. This is the one that builds confidence through execution. And if that continues, look, the Sooners are going to rediscover the November swagger. But let's be honest, let's be clear here. Sustaining it, it's not going to be easy because this is only the second year in the SEC. But this is the first November that the Sooners go into the final month, final 3 weeks of the season with something to play for. And that means no breaks. You've got physical defense looking at you, ready for you to make a mistake. You've got bad weather potential every weekend. You've got, every opening fighting to spoil your season coming your way in both Missouri and LSU. But this is the crucible that forges championship teams. And if Oklahoma can string together a strong finish, not just one big win, but consistent, disciplined football, then the narrative shifts. They're no longer a Big 12 transplant trying to fit in. They are a true SEC contender that can grind out wins when it counts the most. That's how you rebuild a legacy, one November Saturday at a time. So can Oklahoma still own November the way they used to? Well, that's the story we're about to find out. Not through talk, but through toughness. If the Sooners can carry their composure from Knoxville to Tuscaloosa, if they can keep playing physical defense and mistake-free football, then yeah, the November legacy is alive and well. But if not, we're looking at another lesson in how far they've come, but yet how far they still have to go. Either way, though, the next few weeks, they're going to define not just the season, but this program's identity in its new conference home. So, yeah, look, November football has arrived in Norman, and the Sooners are off to a great start, but it gets very, very real a week from Saturday down in Tuscaloosa. But guess what? No game this weekend, which absolutely means, stress-free football for Sooner Nation, and I really hope you enjoy it. We'll talk to you next week. Boomer Sooner.